Welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. It's the fourth week of September. I'm Moon Gan-young, again joined by a wonderful panel of foreign journalists today. Welcome all to the broadcast.
Good to be back again. Thanks.
It's often said that sport and politics are two aspects of our society that have nothing in common. Yet the history of the Olympic movement has provided several examples of how they influence one another directly or indirectly. There can be no doubt that sporting contests and the Olympic Games in particular are a reflection of the real world, a microcosm of international relations. The politics of sport, the topic of our discussion on this week's Foreign Correspondents. Now, Japan's so-called rising sun flag is again at the center of controversy as the organizers of the 2020 Tokyo Olympic Games confirmed that they will not be banning the flag in the official stadium, saying it does not constitute a political statement. The South Korean government has asked the International Olympic authorities to ban the Japanese rising sun flag, saying it's an offensive reminder of colonial atrocities.
우길기라는 것이 주변 국가들에게 과거 군국주의와 제국주의의 상징으로 인식되고 있다는 점은 일본 측도 잘 알고 있을 것으로 생각합니다. 일본 측이 겸허한 태도로 역사를 직시할 필요가 있습니다.
The IOC has said it will carry out an internal review on the matter. I'd like to know your thoughts on Tokyo Olympics Organizing Committee's basically decision to allow the use of the rising sun flag by the spectators of the Games.
I think the timing of it's very interesting this time around, right? Because there's a lot going on with Jisomiya and other tension between South Korea and Japan right now. And I think, right away we're already talking about politics and sports. And I think this is an example of a government using sports for political reasons. And I think that it's not coincidental, the timing of this. And yet again, we're seeing the Japanese government say that this isn't a flag that has any political meaning when most of us know that that's not necessarily the case, and it's certainly not the case here in South Korea. So the timing of it would suggest that there's a little bit more at play.
Yes, I would absolutely agree. It's right in the middle of quite a contentious crisis between South Korea and Japan over issues that are reflected by the flag that really don't see any sign of going away. And you're not going to see the Abe administration in particular take a step away from that. So I think this issue is going to come up again. I think it's interesting, though, that it is again addressing the spectators, not addressing the athletes or participants in the games. So it is limited to their private expressions of I guess political solidarity or nationalism or patriotism at the games.
Now, do we all know why the flag is so offensive to South Koreans? I mean, can you understand why it's such a highly emotive subject?
Yeah, I mean, it's also offensive to some people in China, right, because of the Nanjing massacre and, lots of war crimes that happened between Japan and China. And in South Korea, just so that people know, I mean, the country was occupied by Japan for many years. And without going on a long list of war atrocities, I mean, a lot of these people are still, possibly alive, or their children are alive, or their grandchildren are alive. Like, I myself, being half Korean, like my grandmother, grew up speaking Japanese, and both of her parents died, unfortunately, because of war crimes. And so it's a really raw issue here, and it's understandable that it's offensive. And to say that the flag is apolitical is just simply not true. I do empathize with the fact that some people in Japan might see it as a sign of good fortune or hearkening back to a time when Japan was kind of a bigger militaristic power. But at the end of the day, we can't deny that it is offensive to millions of people potentially. And so I don't know if keeping it is necessarily an apolitical choice.
On September 12th, South Korea's Paralympics Committee also requested a ban on the use of the Rising Sun flag ahead of next year's Games in Tokyo, receiving support from China as well.
그 2차 대전은 긴 세월이 지난 건 아니다. 아직도 그 여러 나라의 국민들의 상처를 안고 있는데 그거를 이런 우객이란 문제로 인해 갖고 아직 벌어지지 않은 일들이니까 그런 부분들은 정치적인 부분도 있고 이래서 벌어지고 나면은 우리가 중국이랑 우리나라랑 함께 좀 논의를 하고 얘기를 하겠다고 그렇게만 답변을 하셨어요.
Now, do you expect Japanese spectators to end up bringing the Rising Sun flag to the stadiums during the 2020 games and flying them in the stadium? Do we expect that?
I think it's really kind of dependent on how much pushback you're going to get here in South Korea in the media. If you see demonstrations in South Korea against the Rising Sun flag, I would say, Shinzo Abe in Japan is going to take advantage of that. And groups that are more conservative in Japan are going to take advantage of that and say, we need to speak up about our own country. And then you're going to see more Rising Sun flags at the Olympics. If South Korea takes a different tone and things turn out differently, particularly in the current trade crisis, then the chances of seeing a lot of Rising Sun flags in the stands perhaps go down.
I mean, I think just based on experience with international competitions that we've seen, I do expect to see it because covering KLeague and covering football here in Korea, we've already seen it. We saw it in 2017 when Kawasaki Frontale came over to play Suwon Samsung Blue Wings in a match. There were Japanese fans that brought and unfurled a Rising Sun flag. So to me, that's somebody that brought that flag. They flew on a plane, very purposefully brought it to Korea to unfurl it in Korea. You know, this is the act of two individuals, but it's not the first time that we've seen the Rising Sun flag from J-League teams or in international sport. And so I think with that flag being used by far-right movements and by other people in Japan right now, I do expect to see it in the stands, and especially like we were saying, because the stance has been to say, well, spectators can use it. So that's a way of kind of pushing the responsibility for who's using it onto the individuals, and then kind of saying, well, it's these individuals in the stands that did it. We didn't block it, but it's these individuals. And again, we've already seen it in football. So I do expect to see it there.
Now, is there even the slightest possibility that South Korea would boycott the games, not only due to this bitter, I guess, sentiment over the Rising Sun flag, but as well as the ongoing trade dispute between the two countries?
From a sporting standpoint, I really hope that they don't, because this means so much to the players that go there. I mean, the Olympics always mean a lot for the athletes that go, but again, from a football perspective, these athletes, if they go and they get a medal, then they get military exemption, which is massive for the career of players. You know, we've seen Sun Heung-min come back for the Asian Games and play with the under-23 team just to get that military exemption so he can keep playing in England, keep earning more money, and it also helps, a star like him helps put South Korea on the map in a really big way.
Sure.
And with a player like Lee Kang-in right now who's coming up, I expect him to be on the World Cup roster, and I think if he can get military exemption, then he's somebody that could then carry that torch from Sun Heung-min. So I think from a player's perspective, it'd be a massive shame if they weren't there.
Absolutely. Now, the statutes of international sporting events such as the International Olympic Committee and FIFA prohibit political statements by athletes and players. For instance, a South Korean footballer who brandished a banner referring to Korea's easternmost Dokdo Island had his medal withheld by the IOC for several months, and a Canadian-born South Korean Olympic team goalie was forced to remove an image of a legendary Korean naval commander from his mask because it was seen as having violated its ban on political messaging. Ryan, FIFA is for sure by far one of the most strict international sporting governing bodies which prohibit players from making any kind of political statements. Do you consider these actions to be political in nature?
Well, I think Park Chung-woo knew what he was doing at the Olympics. I don't think it was something that was premeditated. I don't think before the game he thought that he was going to make a statement about Dokdo, but I think at the Olympics, your national pride is already running really high, and I think after a match where they defeated Japan, of all teams as well, I think that that might have been one of the proudest moments of his life as a Korean, and to see somebody holding that flag, or that banner rather, and just what that means here, what Dokdo means to Koreans, I think that in a moment of passion, which is what sports is all about, right? It's what the Olympics are all about. I think he took that knowing that it was political. And I think that was a political statement. And in the end, he got his medal anyway. He did end up getting his medal. So I think that was, but Matt Dalton having Isun Shin on his mask, I don't think that was a premeditated political thing. I think, and this is a Canadian-born player as well, so I think for him, Isun Shin is just one of the symbols of Korea. And that's why he had him on the mask. And for me, if the IOC is going to say that Isun Shin is too political because he's a war hero, then we have to turn that around and look at the Rising Sun flag. Because if Isun Shin's too political, then surely this flag is as well.
Which brings me to the question, how can you decide whether something is political or not? I mean, what are the standards?
Well, I'm going to have to disagree a little bit. I think the Olympic Games have really run on to be too political, and I would argue that almost every public message contains a good deal of political communication. We have that type of nationalistic and patriotic political communication for a purpose. It's to bring societies together, again, for social cohesion reasons, and from a neo-Marxist perspective, to worship again at that same altar that keeps an elite in power. So, I would certainly support the elimination of political communication of the Olympics, but it's a little bit unrealistic to say the least, and would involve a real overhaul of the games.
So what you're saying is that it's already very political.
Yes, it's already
in nature.
very, very political in nature.
Do you agree with these then international sporting organizations that then athletes should not be allowed to make political statements? I mean, Frank already said that they're political anyway.
People say they don't want politics and sports going together, but as we've said, it's so baked into this product already. Sports and politics are just interwoven. And I think for these athletes, especially Olympic athletes, this is the biggest stage most of them will get. They train their entire life for this, and for track and field, for swimmers, for the vast majority of the Olympians, this is the biggest stage that they'll get. And when it comes to the U.S., we've seen athletes like John Carlos and Tommy Smith that use their platform for something that they thought was greater. And I personally commend that. I think it's amazing because they've worked their whole life for this moment, and they knew that their medal would be stripped away, but they did it anyway. And I think we keep seeing these athletes that feel there isn't a choice, right? Colin Kaepernick, his career in football is essentially over, but he made that choice, and I think we don't necessarily want every single athlete doing this all the time for everything, but I think, and again, especially from like a U.S. perspective, I think the stakes are just so high for people in the United States right now. We've seen this with the I Can't Breathe t-shirts in the NBA. We've seen this with Hands Up, Don't Shoot in reaction to the police killings in the United States. And obviously it's a very contentious issue. It's very divisive and very difficult, but I think to try to silence athletes is just taking away some of their personhood. And these people are players, or these players are people, and I think that they have emotions and they have stakes, and I think that they see this opportunity and they see this platform, and personally I commend them for using it.
But perhaps playing the devil's advocate here, because they should realize that they could impact the general view, or they could impact a certain body of people, should they keep their political views a little bit more reserved, do you think?
I mean, I think to argue that would be alarmingly pro-government, to be honest. I don't think we can argue that we can police people's speech in general, especially when they're famous. I mean, those are the people that have the biggest impact. And I think it's just hypocritical in that it's also selective what kind of political statements and who they're coming from that we choose to make controversial. A while back during the Pyeongchang Olympics, I interviewed Michelle Kwan about how, it was like growing up as an Asian American and kind of some of the difficulties she faced. No one was offended by that, right? So it's interesting that having a black man kneel during the national anthem is more triggering than that. The same goes for, I interviewed a bobsledder who talked about how her race and her gender affected her career and how the women aren't treated as equally. That's a very political statement too. Again, didn't seem to offend anybody.
Right.
So it's just interesting what becomes a national scandal and what ruins people's careers versus what doesn't. And I don't think that public outrage should be the jury that decides who gets canceled or not when they make political statements in sports.
Sporting events have also been used constructively in the political and diplomatic arena, helping to reduce tensions and foster reconciliation. Our team here at Foreign Correspondents was at an international cricket tournament held recently here in Korea, where 4 countries from East Asia gathered to compete. Let's take a quick look.
A rather special international sporting event was held recently here in South Korea. The 2019 Women's East Asia Cup, where 4 cricket teams from across the region competed against one another for the crown.
Cricket is a sport that is unfamiliar to us, having been first introduced 5 years ago at the Incheon Asian Games. Relations between South Korea and Japan aren't too good right now, but I hope the team from Japan, China, and Hong Kong can all get together in the spirit of fair competition and form a bond.
We just focused on what we can control, so it'll be the same mindset against Korea as it will Hong Kong and China. We don't get too caught up in other things.
The teams represented were from South Korea and Japan, which have been locked in a bitter trade dispute in recent months, as well as China and Hong Kong, amid the political crisis unfolding in that city. However, there were no visible signs of tensions in the cricket arena. In the place of political strife and economic retaliations, there was only healthy competition and a spirit of fair play among the athletes.
I am very happy to be participating in this tournament, and I hope to achieve some positive results against some very good teams.
We are well acquainted with the opposing team from Hong Kong. We know how they play and they know how we play. So we can go into this match with a good game plan.
Although we are slightly disappointed that we lost to Japan, we got the results we were expecting from all the time we had spent in training.
Power of sports to overcome political obstacles as such is the reason why sports has often been used as a potent tool of
The most important task is to create opportunities for athletes to interact and form a bond through more international sporting events like the East Asian Cricket Tournament.
So we just heard from the players competing in this event. Have there been any notable cases where sporting events have been successfully employed as a tool of soft diplomacy? You know, for one, we saw in the Pyeongchang Olympics.
I think to just touch on the joint hockey team between North and South Korea, and again, we're talking about flags. I think the flag that was used for that is important because that flag had Dokdo on it. And this is an instance where North Korea and South Korea came together. Obviously, we're both involved in the design of this flag, and they very purposely decided to have Dokdo on it. That's one thing where both North and South came together and displayed this symbol. And I think that that's such an important step. And I think that, again, we're talking about symbolism and nationalism, and I think that that does help soften relations. And then seeing the players together beforehand and taking the pictures together and being a team, I think that was just a massive step.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I attended some pre-game matches of the joint team, and the coach was a Canadian, so there was a Canadian angle to that story. And she was quite open in discussing some of the challenges that the team faced. And she mentioned how initially there was a lot of concern about North Korean athletes taking ice time away from South Korean athletes and communication problems and maybe a little bit of rivalry, maybe a little bit of politics in there. But as time went on and they were able to spend some practices together and work on their game and play a few games, she talked about how they developed some cohesion and some greater understanding as individuals. And I think that, developing these exchanges, even just on that very micro level between individuals, can serve that purpose of greater international understandings. And that's, really part of the whole engagement strategy that the Moon Jae-in administration advocates in terms of relations with North Korea. And, sports diplomacy, as we saw with Pyeongchang in other aspects, certainly can serve that.
Right. If you remember, Pyeongchang Olympics was the igniting factor which led to the series of inter-Korean summits which began in April in 2018. So it did ignite a series of softening relations between the two Koreas there. Now, there are expectations of a revival in inter-Korean sporting exchanges after North Korea's footballing governing body announced they would host several qualifying matches for the 2022 Qatar World Cup in Pyongyang. Now, do you believe that South and North Korea could indeed end up holding their World Cup qualifying match in Pyongyang?
Well, we haven't seen a match in North Korea between the two countries since 1990. So I don't know that this is going to be it. I think just because the timing of it is really narrow. We're talking about an October 15th match. We're only a couple of weeks out, but things can happen last minute. But I think right now, again, we're looking at sports being used as a pawn because right now North Korea is not exactly happy with negotiations with the US, and they know that this is a bargaining chip that they can use. And having a match in North Korea, I think, would be historical. It would be massive, especially to have a star player like Son Heung-min touch down in North Korea and play in North Korea, and the stories of these players from the South going into the North. It would be massive. But I don't find it coincidental with the timing. And I think right now, Beijing's emerging as the likely neutral venue, and I think that that's probably what's going to happen here, because I think that there are more politics at play than there is anything about the World Cup qualifying matches and what those 3 points could mean.
North Korea is also a good team, are they not? Are they not?
They're quite a good team. And I think one of the reasons I would love to see this is because I'd love to see more North Koreans in K-League. We saw Jung Tae-se play for Suwon Samsung Blue Wings a couple years ago, and the fans loved him. He was really revered there. And An Byung-jun is somebody that plays for Suwon FC now, the second division, different team. But we see that, and this goes back to something we were talking about before, of humanizing, right? Because then we see a North Korean player as a person, as a part of this team, a part of this South Korean team. And he gets welcomed into that community, and the fans embrace him, and then it becomes a little bit more difficult to make other North Koreans the other, right? Because there's this human example through sports, this connection that is about community. And that's what I would want to see come out of this, is more player movement within football and maybe other sports, but obviously my focus is on football.
Sure.
But I would love to see some of the talented North Korean players come down and play in K-League.
I mean, on top of, humanizing North Korea and the score issue, I think in the greater picture of denuclearization, President Moon really wants this because we need something to make it seem like there's more momentum being breathed into this process. In the very beginning, since the Pyeongchang Olympics, we kind of already exhausted this long list of kind of ceremonious measures that are not really consequential to denuclearization, like, having a ribbon cutting ceremony for a train line that hasn't been built yet, or blowing up some guard posts in the DMZ. And we've seen since the Vietnam summit, basically nothing happen, and some weapons testing from North Korea. And then, in September, North Korea saying that they want to talk again. And also just, North Korea setting this deadline of like December 31st, basically, for nuclear talks. And so what we really need from an optics perspective is something else that makes it seem like these countries are not in a stalemate, they're not sputtering out and, I guess losing their steam. And I don't want to say that, having a sporting event will lead to denuclearization, because it won't. A lot of this issue is stuck in what the White House in Washington wants to do, but at least it would revitalize this feeling of hope and cooperation between the country. And quite frankly, I think we need it to keep the populace also invested in this as well, in South Korea and the United States and elsewhere.
So we spent this entire session talking about sports and politics and made our journey to sports diplomacy. So if you could write a news headline to summarize today's discussion.
Okay,
Frank.
you mean Frank. Okay. It would be ban the flags, and then the parentheses would be around the S, and then maybe a question mark, and then a whole diatribe about patriotism and nationalism at the Olympics.
Okay. That would be a written piece, right?
Yeah, it would be probably a long written piece that few people might read.
Kelly?
I guess I would go with sports diplomacy is no joke for the two Koreas.
I like that one.
Thanks.
And Ryan.
I'll keep it on brand, and I'll just say the power of football, the power of sport.
Power of sport. I like that too. And that is a wrap for our discussion on the relationship between sports and politics. We'll be back next week for another debate on the latest headlines, so don't forget to tune in then. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.